She told me I was the mistake she'd spent 8 years trying to forget. She said it the way someone discusses a stain on a carpet they finally decided to throw out. No tears, no tremor in her voice, just that flat, clinical disappointment she always reserved for things that had failed her. And the worst part? I almost believed her. For about 30 seconds, standing in the foyer of the house I'd grown up in, I almost let her words rewrite the last 8 years of my life into something I deserved. Then I remembered the basement. I remembered the basement. I remembered the rust on the lock. I remembered the smell of the mattress they gave me when I was 17 years old, and I remembered exactly who had paid for that mattress. My name is Margot. I'm 25 now. And the woman who told me I was a mistake she wanted to forget. That woman is my mother. Let me back up. The day I came home through the police station first. A trucker named Earl had picked me up on a county road outside of Bend, Oregon, around 4 in the morning. I was barefoot. I had a bloody scrape across my left cheek from where I'd gone over a barbed wire fence. I was wearing a man's flannel shirt that didn't belong to me and a pair of sweatpants 2 sizes too big, and I had nothing in my pockets except a piece of paper with my own name written on it in my own handwriting. Because somewhere around year 3, I'd started forgetting it, and I didn't want to forget anymore. Earl didn't ask questions. He just handed me his coffee thermos and drove me to the nearest sheriff's station and told the deputy on duty, "This girl needs more help than I know how to give." Then he sat in the waiting room until a female detective came out and took me into a conference room with a blanket and a bottle of water, and that's where I told them, for the first time in 8 years, that my name was Margot Vesper, that I had been kidnapped from a Greyhound bus station in Eugene the night before my 18th birthday, and that I had been kept in a basement in a house I never saw the outside of until 2 nights ago. The detective went very still. She asked me to repeat my last name. I repeated it. She left the room and came back with 2 more agents, and one of them was FBI, because apparently my disappearance had been a federal case for the better part of a decade. She asked me what year I thought it was, and when I said 2018, she gently told me it was actually 2026. I lost about an hour after that. I don't remember crying. I just remember the texture of the conference room ceiling tiles, and a woman in a navy suit asking me very softly if there was anyone she could call. I gave her my mother's name and our old home phone number. She wrote it down. She stepped outside. When she came back, she had a strange look on her face, the kind of look people get when they've already heard the answer to a question and don't want to be the one to deliver it. She said my mother had remarried, that she lived in a different house now, that she was on her way. I asked about my father. The agent's face changed again. She told me my father had passed away 4 years ago. Heart attack. He was 56. I want to tell you I screamed. I want to tell you I broke something. But what actually happened is that I just sat there and looked at the bottle of water in my hands, and I thought about the time when I was 8 and my dad taught me how to skip rocks at the lake behind our cabin, how he laughed when mine sank straight to the bottom every time, how he kept saying, "Flick the wrist, Margot, flick the wrist." And I thought, he died not knowing where I was. He died thinking I'd run away. He died believing I'd left him. That was the moment I stopped being a victim and started being something else. I'm still not sure what to call it, but it had teeth. My mother arrived 2 hours later. She walked into that station in a cream-colored cashmere coat and pearl earrings, like she was coming from brunch. Her hair was different than I remembered. Shorter, highlighted. She'd lost weight. She looked, honestly, fantastic. Like a woman who had been resting. And when she saw me, her face did something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She flinched. Not the flinch of a mother seeing her lost daughter. Not the flinch of grief or shock or recognition. The flinch of someone seeing a bill collector at the door. She recovered fast. I'll give her that. She covered her mouth. She made the appropriate sound. She crossed the room and held me. She smelled like a perfume I didn't recognize. She said, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," over and over again, and the FBI agents in the room watched her perform, and one of them, the woman in the navy suit, watched me watching my mother. I think she clocked it before I did. I think she knew, in that moment, before any of us had any evidence at all. The man my mother brought with her was named Curtis Halderman. He was about her age, 62, a real estate developer she'd married 4 years ago, 6 months after my father died. He was a big man with a soft handshake. He didn't really look at me. He looked at her, and then at the agents, and then at her again. And I noticed he was sweating along the hairline. They took me back to their house that night, not the house I grew up in. A different house, a bigger one, in a gated community north of Portland. I had a guest room with white linens and a private bathroom with a soaking tub, and my mother told me to take all the time I needed, that the doctor would come tomorrow, that we take everything one day at a time. She kissed my forehead. She closed the door. I sat on the bed in someone else's clothes, and I listened. The vents in that house carried sound the way a seashell carries the ocean. I don't think they realized it. I could hear them in the kitchen, 2 floors down, as clearly as if they were in the next room. I heard my mother say, "Curtis, stop pacing, you're going to give us away." I heard Curtis say, "What if she remembers?" I heard my mother say, "She was 17, she didn't know anything, she still doesn't." And I heard her say, very calmly, "We just have to figure out what she does know, and then we figure out what to do about it." I didn't move for a long time. I sat on that bed and I listened to my mother and her husband discuss what to do about me, and I understood, in a way I hadn't understood 3 hours earlier, that I had not escaped. I had simply walked into a different cage with nicer sheets. Here's what I learned in the days that followed. My grandmother on my father's side, a woman named Mim, had passed away the year I turned 17. Mim had been quietly, almost embarrassingly wealthy. She'd built a chain of orchard supply stores across the Pacific Northwest in the 1970s and sold them off in the 90s, and she parked the money in a trust fund with very particular conditions. The trust was in my name. It was set to mature on my 25th birthday. The principal, by the time it matured, would be a little over $6 million. The trust had been written by Mim's longtime attorney, a man named Purnell Boggs, and Purnell had built it like a fortress. The money could not pass to my mother under any circumstances. Mim had never trusted my mother. Mim had told my father on more than one occasion that he had married a woman who confused love with leverage. The trust was specifically designed to skip my mother and go directly to me. With one notable exception, if I died before the trust matured, the principal would be distributed according to the terms of my father's estate, since my father was Mim's only living child and the natural inheritor. My father, while he was alive, had a will that left everything to me, but after my disappearance, after 7 years had passed, I was declared legally dead. The state of Oregon allows that with the right paperwork and the right judge. And once I was declared dead, my father's will became the operative document, and my father had died 4 years before me on paper, which meant his estate had already passed to my mother, his widow. You see where this is going. I was supposed to inherit $6 million on my 25th birthday. Instead, my mother and Curtis were going to inherit it on the day the legal declaration of death was finalized, which, I learned later, was scheduled for 14 days after I walked into that sheriff's station in Bend. 14 days. I had escaped 14 days before they were going to be rich. I want to tell you something about the man who held me. His name was Ridge. Ridge Vermillion, if you can believe a name like that. He was a low-level felon out of Spokane who had done a stint for armed robbery in his 20s and had been looking for what he called a real opportunity ever since. He was 41 when he took me. He was not a smart man. He was a useful man, which is different. He kept me in the basement of a house his late mother had owned outside of Sisters, Oregon. He fed me. He brought me books, eventually. He did not touch me. And I want to be very clear about that, because that question always comes up, and I am tired of answering it. He didn't touch me because he had been told not to. He had been told to keep me alive, keep me hidden, and keep me until further notice. Further notice was supposed to be the day after my 25th birthday, when I would no longer be useful to anyone, and Ridge would be paid the second half of his money and given instructions on how to make me disappear permanently. I know this because Ridge told me the night I escaped. He was drunk. He was always drunk by 10 p.m., but that night he was drunker than usual, and he came down the basement stairs with a bottle of bourbon, and he sat on the bottom step and he started talking about the woman. He always called her the woman. He never used her name. He said the woman had called him 3 days earlier and told him the timeline was getting tight, that the lawyer was getting itchy, that something was going to happen soon. He said, "I've been doing this 9 years for this lady, and I'll tell you what, I don't even like her." He laughed. He took another drink, and then he said, "You don't even know who she is, do you?" I told him I didn't. He laughed again. He said, "Good." He left the bourbon bottle on the bottom step when he went back upstairs. He forgot to lock the door behind him. I think he was so drunk he just assumed he had. I waited an hour. Then I climbed the stairs in my socks and I walked through that house for the first time in 8 years. And I went out the back door into a field, and I ran until my lungs gave out, and I climbed a barbed wire fence, and I kept running until Earl picked me up on the side of County Road 20. Ridge was arrested 2 days later. He gave them everything. He gave them the woman's phone number. He gave them the burner phone she'd been calling from for 9 years. He gave them a name eventually when they made it clear they were going to put him away for life either way, and the only question was how cooperative he wanted to be. The name he gave them was my mother's. The FBI took 2 weeks to build the case. 2 weeks during which I slept in my mother's guest room and ate my mother's food and let my mother brush my hair while she cried fake tears about all the time we'd lost. 2 weeks during which Curtis avoided me whenever he could and watched me whenever he couldn't. 2 weeks during which I memorized the security code to my mother's office and the location of her safe and the schedule of her housekeeper, a kind woman named Marguerite, who I'm pretty sure was the only honest person in that house. The FBI agent in the Navy suit, whose name was Agent Work, met with me 3 times during those 2 weeks. We met at a coffee shop, then at a bookstore, then at a public library where she'd reserved a study room. She told me what they had. She told me what they needed. She told me they were close, but they needed something to put my mother in the room with Ridge, something direct, something they could put in front of a jury. I gave them that something. It was a Sunday afternoon. Curtis was at the country club. Marguerite was off. My mother was in her sunroom drinking a glass of white wine and reading a magazine, and I came in and sat down across from her, and I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something." She put the magazine down. She gave me her full, beautiful, attentive face. She said, "Anything, sweetheart." I said, "Did you know a man named Ridge Vermillion?" The thing about my mother is that she was not as good a liar as she thought she was. She was good at the long con, the slow grift, the kind of deception that builds over years. She was bad at the sudden one. She was bad when she didn't have time to prepare. And in that moment, sitting in her sunroom in her cream-colored linen pants, I watched her face do 4 different things in less than 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, calculation, performance. She said, "No, honey." "Who was that?" I had a recorder in my pocket. It was a digital one Agent Rourke had given me, no bigger than a tube of lipstick. I had been carrying it for 9 days. I said, "He says he knows you. He says you paid him to take me." Her face did the 4 things again. She set down her wine glass. She said, "Margot, I don't know what they've told you, but you have been through unimaginable trauma, and people will say anything." I said, "He says you called him 3 days before I escaped." She said, "Margot," I said, "he says you've been calling him for 9 years. She stood up. She walked to the window. She kept her back to me. She said, very quietly, "What do you want?" That was it. That was the moment. 3 words, with her back turned and her breath fogging the glass. I said, "I want to know why." She turned around. And the woman who looked at me then was not the woman who had picked me up at the police station. That woman was a costume. This woman was something else. This woman had been there the whole time, underneath. This woman looked at me like I was a problem she was going to have to solve, the way she'd looked at a leaking dishwasher once when I was 12. She said, "Because your father loved you more than he loved me, and his mother loved you more than she loved her own son, and the 2 of them set up that trust like I was the help, Like I had spent 20 years raising you for free. Like I was nothing. She took a breath. She said, "You were a mistake of my past, Margot. I should have ended it years ago. You're just lucky I'm a coward." I let her finish. I let her say every word. Then I stood up. I walked out of the sunroom. I walked out of the sunroom. I walked out of the house. I got into the car Agent Rourke had parked at the end of the driveway, and I handed her the recorder, and I sat in the passenger seat, and I did not cry. I did not cry until much later in a hotel room with the lights off by myself. The FBI arrested my mother 3 hours later. They arrested Curtis at his country club, which I admit gave me a small mean pleasure. They arrested Ridge's cousin, a woman named Patrice, who had been laundering the payment installments through a fake landscaping business in Bend for 9 years. They arrested Pernell Boggs' former paralegal, a man who had forged my signature on the death declaration paperwork in exchange for $40,000. They arrested everyone, and they charged everyone, and the prosecutor, a woman named Annalise Ford, told me in our first meeting that she was going to ask for the maximum on every single one of them. She did. She got it. My mother was sentenced to 42 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, wire fraud, mail fraud, and obstruction of justice. Curtis got 28. Ridge got life. Patrice got 15. The paralegal got 7. The judge, a woman named Honor something, I forget her last name now, looked at my mother during sentencing and said, "I have presided over this courtroom for 19 years, and I have rarely seen a betrayal of the parental relationship as complete and as cold as the one I see in front of me today." My mother did not look at me during the sentencing. Not once. I sat in the second row, and I watched her face the judge, and I watched her not turn her head, and I understood that she was going to spend the rest of her life pretending I did not exist. Which I realized was how she had spent the previous 9 years anyway. The only thing that had changed was the venue. The trust matured on my 25th birthday, 3 months after the verdict. The principal, after legal fees and taxes and the cost of 2 private investigators I'd hired to help the FBI fill in the gaps in Patrice's bookkeeping, came out to a little over $5 million. I gave half of it away. I'm not telling you that to sound noble. I'm telling you because it's the part that mattered. I gave $1 million to a foundation that funds search efforts for missing adults, the kind of cases that don't make the news because the missing person is over 18 and broke, and from a family no one cares about. I gave another $1 million to set up a scholarship in my father's name at the community college where he taught woodworking on weekends for the last decade of his life. I sent $100,000 to Earl the trucker anonymously through his daughter, who I tracked down on Facebook. I sent $50,000 to Marguerite, my mother's housekeeper, with a note that just said, "Thank you for being kind to me." She wrote back, "We still email." The rest I kept. I bought a small house in a town I won't name, in a state that isn't Oregon. I planted a garden. I got a dog, a black mutt with 1 bad ear, who I named Earl after the trucker. I started seeing a therapist who specializes in long-term captivity survivors, and I started sleeping through the night slowly, 1 night at a time. I started writing things down, not for a book, just for me. Just to make sure I didn't forget the things I'd worked so hard to remember. People ask me sometimes if I forgive my mother. The answer is no. Not because I'm holding on to something, because forgiveness, the way most people mean it, requires the other person to ask for it. And my mother has never asked. She has written me 3 letters from prison. The first one was an apology she clearly thought would sound sincere. The second was a request for money for her commissary account. The third was a 5-page argument explaining why what she did was, when you really thought about it, not as bad as everyone made it out to be. I don't read them anymore. They go in a drawer. The drawer fills up. Eventually, I'll throw the drawer away. Here's the thing I want to tell you, the thing that took me a long time to learn. Family is not blood. Family is not shared last names or shared houses or shared genetic material. Family is the trucker who didn't ask questions. Family is the housekeeper who slipped me a piece of toast when she could see I hadn't been eating. Family is the FBI agent who watched my mother and understood, before I did, what I was going to need her to do. Family is my father, who died believing I had run away, who never stopped looking, who left me a will and a trust and a name and a memory of teaching me to skip rocks. Family is the people who choose you when they have every reason not to. My mother chose money. She chose comfort. She chose the cream-colored cashmere coat and the gated community and the man with the soft handshake. She chose to look at her 17-year-old daughter and decide that daughter was a number on a balance sheet. And then she chose, every single day for 9 years, not to change her mind. That's not a mistake. A mistake is something you make once. What she did was a decision she renewed every morning when she woke up. I am not the mistake she wanted to forget. I am the consequence she didn't plan for, and I have a very long memory. Last week, I was at the farmer's market in my new town, and a woman about my age stopped me near the bread stand. She said, "I'm sorry this is so weird, but are you Margot Vesper?" I almost said no. I'm so used to saying no. But I looked at her, and she was not a reporter, and she was not a stranger trying to sell me something. She was just a woman with a canvas bag and a baby strapped to her chest, and she was looking at me the way people look at someone they've been thinking about for a long time. She said, "I just wanted to say I followed your case, and I'm really glad you came home." I told her thank you. I told her I was glad too. I bought a loaf of sourdough. I walked back to my car. Earl the dog was waiting for me with his head out the window, and the air smelled like rain and wood smoke. And I thought, this is home. Not the house I grew up in. Not the gated community. Not the basement. This sidewalk, this dog, this dolk of bread, this town where one woman knew my name and chose to say it kindly. That is what I came home to. That is what she tried to take. And that is what she will spend the next 42 years thinking about, while I plant tomatoes and walk my dog and learn, one ordinary day at a time, what it feels like to be a person who was wanted. My name is Margot. I am 25 years old. I was gone for 8 years, and I came back, and the woman who said I was a mistake she wanted to forget will be remembered for exactly one thing when she dies, which is what she did to me. I will be remembered for everything that came after. I think about cause and effect a lot now, about the small choices my mother made every morning for 9 years that added up to a 42-year sentence. She didn't wake up one day and become a monster. She woke up one day and chose comfort over her child, and then she made that same choice again the next morning and the morning after that, until the choice had hardened into a person she didn't recognize anymore. That's how it happens, not in one big betrayal. In 10,000 small ones, repeated until they feel ordinary. I learned something in that basement that nobody teaches you in school. I learned that your character is not what you say you believe. Your character is what you do when no one is watching, and the easy thing is the wrong thing. My mother had every chance to call off Ridge, every birthday, every Christmas, every time my father cried about me at the dinner table. She made a choice every single one of those days. And those choices built the woman who flinched when she saw me at the police station. But I also learned the opposite, and I want you to hear this part. Earl the trucker had every reason to keep driving. He didn't know me. I was a strange barefoot girl in the dark on a county road. He could have told himself it wasn't his problem, the way most people would. He didn't. He stopped. And that one decision, made by a man I'll probably never see again, is the reason I'm alive to tell you any of this. Decency is also built one small choice at a time. So is courage. So is the kind of mind that refuses to look away. I'm not going to pretend I came out of that basement wise. I came out of it angry. I came out of it broken in places I'm still finding. But I learned that nobody gets to write the ending of your story except you, and the only way to take that pen back is to refuse to become what was done to you. My mother wanted me to be a victim, and then a corpse, and then a footnote. I'm none of those things, not because I'm strong, because I decided every morning for the last year that I would not let her have the last word about who I am. That's the work. Not forgiveness, which is overrated. Not revenge, which is hollow. Just the daily unglamorous work of building yourself back, one ordinary morning at a time. Choosing to plant tomatoes. Choosing to feed the dog. Choosing to remember your father teaching you to skip rocks instead of remembering the basement. You are the sum of what you choose when nobody's clapping. Choose well. Choose every day. The people who try to erase you don't get to decide who you become.